We're back. 9.8% estimation. So number one here, choose the best estimate. 19% of 50. So we want two numbers that cooperate well together. Now 19% of 50, those don't get along too well. So what if I were to change this instead of 19%? What if I were to change it to 20% of 50? Again, this is going to be an estimate. It's not going to be exact. We're going to be close, but not dead on. We might be exact sometimes if the two numbers cooperate well, but that's going to be rare. So 20% of 50. Okay, think about this. What is 10% of 50? 10%. Well, 10% of a number, you just take this decimal and you move it to the left one. So 10% of 50 is what? 10% would be 5. So 20% would have to be twice that, which is 10. So B, 20% of 50 is a good estimate there. So go ahead and pause the video now. If you get stuck, unpause the video. I'm going to work out 2, 3, and 4, but I want you to pause the video now and give it a shot on your own here. 2, 3, and 4, and then watch the video, see if you got them right. Okay, number 2, 76% of 240. So 75% of 240, that works well. Remember, 75% is 3/4. So if you're looking at that, you're like, well, I don't know what 75% of 240 is. What's 1/4 of 240? In other words, what's 240 divided by 4? 60, right? So 3/4 is going to be 60 times 3. So it's going to be 60 times 3, 180. 180. Again, if you're wondering how I did that, 75% of 240, 75% is 3/4. So I think about what is 1/4 of 240, 1/4 of that, you divide it by 4 and you get 60. Well, 3/4, give me 3 times that, 180. On to number 3, 3/4 of a percent. Now be careful. This looks like the previous one, right? You're thinking 3/4. Well, that's like 75%. Hold on, not so fast. That's 3/4 of a percent. 3/4 of a percent. That means like less than 1%, right? If this were 1%, that's bigger than 3/4 of a percent, right? So let's change this to 1% of 90. So if for 10%, looking up here at the top one here, remember we said we're going to take 10% of 50 and we move our decimal over one spot to the left. That gave us 5. That's like dividing by 10. 1%, you got to move the decimal over how far? 2 spots. So the decimal goes 1, 2. The decimal is going to go right there. That's 0.90. 0.90 is 0.9. So 0.9 there. Again, if you're stuck on that one, 3/4 of a percent, that is less than 1%. So we're going to make it 1% to make it a nice number to work with 90. And 1%, that's like 1/100th. It's like you divide by 100. So if we move the decimal one spot over to find 10%, to find 1%, we got to move the decimal over 2 spots. Number 4, 193% of 800. Well, 200%, that works well with 800. Think about what 200% is as a decimal. You move that decimal over 2 spots, 1, 2. Remember, percentage to a decimal, it gets smaller. Decimal to a percentage, it gets bigger. So if you're changing to a percent, it gets bigger. Changing to a decimal, it gets smaller. So this is like 2, right? The decimal 2. So we're going to multiply here. 2 times 800, we get 1600. 1600. 2 times 800. 2 times 800. 1600. What I want you to notice up here is sometimes we thought about these percentages as fractions. So sometimes that happens. So keeping in mind that sometimes we want a fraction or possibly even a mixed number or a whole number, that's where this next section comes in. So write a fraction, mixed number, or whole number you could use to estimate. So 35%. That's like 0.33 when you make it a decimal, right? So this is going to be 1/3. Again, if you're wondering how I got that, this is equal to 0.35 when I make it a decimal. 0.35 is pretty close to zero point 0.3 repeating, which is 1/3. Let's go on to 9. 99%. All right, this is pretty close to 100%, right? So that's pretty close to 100%. And what is 100% as a decimal? It is 1. So 1 is what we get there. Number 13. All right. 123%. Okay, let's think about 23%. What is 23% pretty close to? It's pretty close to 25%. What is 25% as a decimal? It's 0.25, right? 25% as a decimal is 0.25. So this is going to be, remember 100% is 1, we just said in the previous problem, so that's 1.25. Or you might say 1 and 1/4. So there you go. Oh, excuse me. So either of those would work, 1.25 or 1 and 1/4. Let me do one more here with you here. 5 and 1/5%. Be careful on this one. Just because you see a fraction here doesn't mean it's not still a percentage. So this is pretty close to 5%, isn't it? Right? So it's not equal. I should say it's about 5%. Hang on one second. Let me erase that. So it's about 5%. What is 5% as a decimal? It's 0.05. All right, so now let's change 0.05 to a fraction. 0.05 to a fraction. I just happen to know that 0.05 is 1/20th, but what you could do is you could put it over 100, right? 5 over 100. That's the hundredths place. So you could put 5 over 100. Both these, you divide them both by 5 and it becomes 1/20th. You didn't have to show that if you just know that 0.05 is 1/20th. All right, so pause the video now. Finish out this section here. All right, next section here says estimate. So 9% of 45. Let's find some numbers that go together. How about 10% of 45? 10% of a number, you're going to take that decimal, slide it over one spot. So right there, and we get 4.5. 4.5. Again, we're looking for two numbers that work together well. 26%, I look at that and I think that's pretty close to 25%. What is 25%? 25% is 0.25 or 1/4. So what is 1/4 of 64, or 64 divided by 4? Well, what's it divided by 2? 32. And what's that divided by 2? 16. So 1/4 of 64 is 16. We hopefully can do this mentally. I don't have a calculator here. I'm doing this all mentally. 98% of 75. 98%, that's pretty close to 100%. All right, think about this. What is 100% when you write it as a decimal? It's 1. So what's 1 times 75? Again, you don't have to write this out. Hopefully you're doing it mentally. 1 times 75 is 75. So uh, think about this logically, right? If you have $75, and I say, all right, now you have, instead of having 75, you still have 98% of your money. Well, you retained almost all your money. You lost 2%, but you still have almost 75. So 75 is a good estimate there. Number 26, 1.3% of 97. Well, that's really close to 1%. And 1%, well, when you find 1% of something, that's like dividing by 100. When you divide by 100, you take that decimal point, you move it over 2 spots. So we get 0.97. All right, that happened again. Let's try that again. 0.97 there for number 26. Let's talk about a problem like number 18. 47% of $35.96. On this one, I want to change both of them. So 50%, that's pretty close to 47%. It's pretty easy to work with too. Uh, $35.95, that's really close to $36. So what's half of 36? It's 18. Okay, so $18. Very good. Go ahead and finish this section out. Pause the video now, finish out this section. All right, last section here. This is a little tricky because we got to find numbers that work well together, estimate each percent. So we're going to change these to a fraction first, then change it to a decimal, then change it to a percent. First off, 21 out of 60. That's going to be like 20 out of 60. You can simplify that fraction and you find out that it simplifies to 1/3. 1/3. Now, what is 1/3 as a decimal? It's 0.3 repeating. And when we change that to a percentage, going from a decimal to a percentage, we get bigger or smaller. Decimal to a percentage, we get bigger. So we slide that decimal over 2 spots and we get 33. And you could say 0.3 repeating if you wanted to percent. That's fine. Or if you would rather write it like this, 33 and 0.3 repeating is 1/3. We talked about that earlier today. 33 and 1/3%. I would take either of those because 0.3 repeating and 1/3, they are the same thing. All right, number 32. Oh, okay. 7 out of 79. Those do not cooperate well, but 7 over, what number close to 79 cooperates well with 7 when we divide? They work well together. 7 and what? 7 divided by 77. We can divide these both by 7 and we get 1/11. So there we go. Oh, wait, hang on 1 second. Okay, so it says estimate each percent. Okay, now 1/11, that is pretty close to what fraction that you can easily change to a percent? 1/10, which is 10%. 1/10 is 10%. All right, next one here, 35. All right, so on number 35, I'm going to tell you right now, there's a few ways to go. So if you don't think about number 35 exactly the way I do, that is totally fine by me. But numbers that are close to 12 and 81, that when you divide them, they divide evenly into each other. How about if we work with 10 and we work with 80? 10 and 80. So 10 over 80, that's 1/8. Now 1/8 as a decimal, maybe you have this memorized, maybe you don't. It's a good one to memorize. It's half of a fourth, right? So what's half of 0.25 is 0.125, right? So half of 25 cents would be 12.5 cents. And so this is going to be 12.5%. There we go. That was a little tricky. And again, you have to alter 12 and 81. And if there's a couple different ways to go about this. So if you didn't quite do it like that, that is okay. So go ahead and work these out. Keep in mind, sometimes you are changing both of them. Sometimes you're changing just one of them like we did on number 29 here. So pause the video now, finish out this section.